Okay, thank you for this opportunity to come together and welcome to Emerging Perspectives, a roundtable discussion. Before we begin, we would like to offer a land and labor acknowledgement. Should I be closer? Would that work? Is that better? Yeah. Okay, great. All this technology. So, yes, as I was saying, we would like to offer a land and labor acknowledgement. How do I, wait, hold on. There we go, okay. We recognize our presence on contested ground and acknowledge the indigenous land stewards, past, present, and future, and their right to land back and embodied sovereignty. We acknowledge the enslaved people of the African and Caribbean diaspora and their descendants, whose forced sacrifice founded much of this country's social and economic infrastructure upon which we prosper. And we honor the many caregivers.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's, hello. Hello, caregivers. I know some of you are amongst us. Yes, okay, so thank you. Very intimate.
Is it too intimate?
No, this is fine if you can hear me. I'm fine with this. We honor the many caregivers, including Mrs. Elsie, who's with us via Zoom, who nurture our most vulnerable kin while we work. If you'd like to join me in a breath, I breathe in, giving thanks to our shared communal space, and breathe out, noticing who is not here. I root in abundance to guide relationship building and action that celebrate our interconnected humanity. Thank you for engaging with that reflection. Okay, so hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a choreographer and screen dance practitioner at the University of California, Irvine, as an assistant professor teaching studio practice in modern contemporary dance composition and screen dance. This is an image from a work, the dancer is Annika Whetstone, many wonderful collaborators. But today, we're talking about our artists and panelists, including George Elsie Jr., Wei-Li Wong, and Meredith Webster. And I will share their bios and links because the technology and the screen are all set up. I will do that towards the end. Bios and links to their films. I've had the great pleasure to know and collaborate with each of them. I first admired George during his undergraduate dance minor studies at Bowdoin College. Wei-Li blew me away during her MFA dance studies at UCI, and we continue as collaborators. And I swooned for Meredith during a multi-choreographer project called Empress Archer. So I'm so grateful our paths have intersected, and I'm delighted to introduce you and your screen dance works here today. So I'll ask each panelist to share more about themselves. George.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is George Elsie Jr. I am from Chicago, and currently I am an MFA candidate at DePaul University with a concentration on directing for film and television. Today, I'm presenting my lyrical experimental film called Switchin', which explores the communication habits of African Americans, both nonverbal and verbal, as well as how that language changes when we are in spaces that we are the minority. And my pronouns are he, him, his.
Thank you so much. Wei-Li.
Hi, my name is Wei-Li Wong. My pronouns are she, they. I currently sit upon the unceded ancestral lands of the Ahashman, Tongva, and Kizh. The title of my screen dance today is Chasu Chasm, a work that explores duality, transcontinental passage of my family from China to Taiwan and then to the States, and fragmented identities. I hold a BFA in film studies from the University of Colorado at Boulder and an MFA in dance from UC Irvine, where I met Charlotte. I'm currently a lecturer at Cypress College and a resident choreographer with Mashup Contemporary Dance. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Whaley. Meredith.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Webster, and my pronouns are she, her, or anything that you might say respectfully. I am originally from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and I'm currently living on Ohlone land in Huichin, which is also known as the Confederated Villages of Lishan, which is also known as Oakland, California. My screen dance that I'll be talking about today mostly was made in Wyoming on the ancestral lands of the Shoshone and Bannock peoples, among others. The name of my screen dance is Numenon, and that was inspired by the book A Sand County Almanac that was written by Aldo Leopold. He defines the word noumenon as the imponderable essence of material things. And he describes specific bird species that he sees as representing the noumenon for particular landscapes, like the grouse in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. In my time in Wyoming, I was seeking to sort of embody this concept and integrate myself with the land and physically express something essential about it, as opposed to just using it as a beautiful backdrop. Currently staging works on behalf of Alonzo King and have worked with Alonzo King Lines Ballet for over 16 years. Also currently collaborating and performing in a few projects for film and live performance and scheming about my next screen dance. And really happy to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yay. Okay, let's jump in with the nuts and bolts. How did you construct and realize your vision for this work? Whaley.
Hi, yeah. This particular work emerged as in a screen dance course during my graduate studies. So the class was with Charlotte. In the technical aspect, it was a rather simple shoot with 2 dancers on a soundstage, a DSLR setup, 2 lighting looks, and I cut together the film in Premiere and then brought in a sound designer as a collaborator in addition to the dancers. The process with the dancers included conversations about our families, some improvisational tasks, and phrase work that spoke to the feeling and the story that we were hoping to convey.
Thank you, Whaley. And just as we're listening, there will be plenty of time for questions. So please we're gonna do our big introduction of their works and then have time for you. So go ahead and start thinking about your questions. Meredith.
So this work was really made possible by Babs Case, who's the director of Dancers Workshop in Jackson, Wyoming, and she's a presenter there. She had presented lines twice while I was dancing. So while I was there as a dancer, she was saying to all of the dancers, please come back anytime, come back and make work or teach or just come and go on a hike. And so I had taken her up on that, and I had the privilege of using the space, partly because the pandemic was keeping the space empty from the classes and rehearsals at the Dancers Workshop. And I spent about half of my time in the studio trying to make dance. And the other half of the time I sort of drove off into the landscape and stopped when I felt something needed to happen there. I did have a couple of days where I had camera operator support from Babs, but most of the time, especially in the first few weeks of the 1 month I was there, I was working alone. And in those first few weeks, I was not smart enough to bring a tripod, partly because I didn't know what I was going to be making. So if you want to play the little clip here, this is one of my first shots where I was using the thing that I use in my car to hold the phone while I'm navigating, and I put it in the passenger seat air conditioner vent, turned it out the window, rolled the window down and tried to pull over, and then tried to get it, flat, and then shot out my window that way. So it was all made on an iPhone, and that's the basics of it.
Thank you so much.
So Switchin came about through my experimental graduate program class. Prior to that, I made 2 short films in the class that relied heavily on music. And for the final, I wanted to give myself a limitation to create my own music for the film. So as I stated before, it's a celebration of Black communication habits as well as how that language changes when we are in the minority in any space. So here's a taste of what the film is like.
Okay. 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 I see you. I see you. Okay. I see you. I see you. Hey. Let's go. That's my turn. Do that. That's my turn. Do that. Yeah. Do that. Yeah. Do that. Yeah. Do that. Yeah. Do that. Yeah.
Okay, so as you see, it relies heavily on musicality, and what the nuts and bolts of it, I filmed everyone individually, and I wanted to manufacture a conversation between these people to really explore how Black people communicate with one another, even if we don't know each other. I was intentional on putting them in vertical spheres or lanes to dig at the point how language is sort of a divider, but also can be a unifier in so many ways. But then also to like poke fun at social media activism, how we post things about Black Lives Matter or Me Too or whatever phase or cause that needs to be promoted at the moment, but then it is quickly scrolled away. And throughout the whole piece, I wanted a dancer to embody the physicality of the African Americans speaking, when the African Americans speak with the white actors and when the white actors speak with each other. So it's a film that's in 3 parts, and it was made primarily on an iPhone because we did it in the height of the pandemic. And I used my friends who were in my COVID or my pandemic bubble or whatever the phrase was to ensure safety. So it's really a back and forth of language in certain spaces.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so bells and whistles. How did you embellish this unique creation, which you've already started talking about, and what makes this work particularly special to you or to the trajectory of your work? Meredith.
So as I sort of mentioned, this residency period where I got to work on this was in the summer of 2020, which was a big transition time for me. I was stepping away from working full-time at Lines Ballet after 15 years of doing that. So it was a time where I was moving from listening to and representing the voice of a single choreographer and director and stepping into the unknown and wanting to learn more about my own voice and how it's separated from that. At Lines, I did so much super physical, athletic, virtuosic and effortful movement. And a lot of my desire is really to move slow. And that is because I find so much richness, almost like the slower I move, the more I learn and the more information I find in movement. And I always knew that I wanted Wyoming to be part of that sort of chapter change for myself, because I'm really moved in Wyoming by the landscape, which you can maybe see why in this photo. The amount of information that is in this landscape and the scale and the pace of it is so rich to me. And I wanted to play with the way that our human scale and our human rhythms can sort of integrate or come up against this pace, and see how my body would react to these concepts. Maybe you can go to the next slide, please, Charlotte, of a time frame that's a bit different, more like the scale of geological time or weather patterns or the way light moves across the horizon. So I ended up experimenting a lot with moving really slowly and trying to feel all of that information. And then later on taking the clips and often speeding them up a lot and trying to sort of let us see at the human scale all that's going on in that landscape over time. Thanks.
Thank you.
So for Switchin', it was, why this short means so much to me is primarily because I used the resources that I had during COVID, during the first wave. So we talked about this on Sunday about that punk rock, do-it-yourself type of grit that you need to make a film. And with Switchin', I didn't have anything. I had my iPhone, and my cinematographer thankfully had his Blackmagic camera. And those limitations really informed how I created the film. And again, just using the resources that I had. So I filmed at my mother's apartment in the hallway. So I called my friends one at a time to like film on a white wall. And then I knew I wanted the middle panel where the dancer was performing or translating the language through her body to be in a different space. So I used my mother's office for the dance portion. So I'm really proud of the short because it shows that you can use whatever resources that you have as long as you have an intent and vision for your film. And another thing that I love about Switchin' so much is that when we think about social activism and racism prejudice, we always talk about just the body. It's just like my black body is a form of, anti-ness or otherness in space. But we often don't talk about language and voice, and there is a lot of discrimination when it comes to how African Americans or people of color speak in certain spaces. So it was really interesting to take different phrases from each actor in the film and then craft a song that really took the audience on a journey of this is the celebration of Black culture, and then the shift into being in a white space, and then taking that same language that the African Americans use and appropriating that for the white actors. So it was fun to construct. It took a long time, especially with the editing process, but I'm very proud of how we got to the point of Switchin'.
Thank you.
So the idea for Toss the Chasm is really informed by fragmented and hyphenated identities, which is something that I keep discovering and shows up in my work. Sometimes the idea is conveyed in the narrative arc or how something is cut, the scenery, the sonic landscape. Something that we had a lot of fun with in this particular film was this idea of stutter cutting, these like rapid, discontinuous sequences that are put together into the film. Playing with the idea of tearing apart and putting something back together is like the Japanese kintsugi to me, where the breakage of the pottery is mended and treated as a part of the history of the object. And that's how my whole being feels like, sometimes a little broken, but mending. We can play the next slide if possible, please. Yeah, and another thing we got to play with was our sound design. So the sound designer, Andrew J. Tar, constructed this box. This magic box is what we're sticking with. And the idea is that it is a spring reverb tank that fragments and echoes sound, sending different signals and source material to the contact mic. And it fragments in a way that felt right for this particular project.
Thank you all. All right, let's get into the heart and soul. What inspired this creation, and how does it connect to the heart and soul of your personal story and the ideas you aspire to bring into conversation with your audiences and the world?
So for Switchin', both my experimental and narrative works come from a personal space. During the first wave of the pandemic, I was polarized. I was not polarized, but paralyzed a little bit with the racial upheaval. And prior to that, my work didn't really delve into racial issues. But during that time, I had to reflect on what do I have to say? How does this impact me? And so Switchin' is really based off an experience I had in undergrad, where a professor told me in his office hours, he critiqued the way that I spoke and the way that I communicated in my papers, and basically said, the way that what you did at home doesn't work here. And though it wasn't a traumatic experience by any means, it's definitely something that's stuck in my mind in spaces for academia. And that was the bedrock for switching. What are these standards for communication? Who creates those standards? As well as for African Americans, we learn two languages, if you will. Because of slavery, we were stripped of our native tongue from whatever land we came from. But in America, we've learned to craft our own slang, our own language to communicate into our community, but also at a very young age, we learn how to communicate to become acceptable or approval in spaces that we are the minority. So in some ways, I have two languages under my belt, but switching is really a conversation between the language within our community and outside, as well as what is the line between appreciation of a culture and appropriation.
Thank you, George.
The inspiration for this work and a lot of my work is trying to understand my family. I'm the youngest on my mother's side of the family, including all of the cousins, and youngest by a lot. And I think that sometimes translates to nobody tells the youngest anything. And so a lot of my work is trying to just learn about my own family history in an effort to feel closer to them. The other side of this is that I grew up in a predominantly white space in Colorado. And when I landed in California for my graduate studies with so many others, there's a huge Asian diaspora here and so many others who share the transcontinental passage, I felt really seen and validated in this space. And it gave me a kind of permission to make my work at large and research in a way that felt rooted in this community. And I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you.
So, June of 2020, as we all know, was a really intense time. Oakland, my city, was really busy and full of protest and activism and community building, and in response to the death of George Floyd and everything that has come before that. Also, California was quite literally on fire. That is just the fires in 2020 that you're seeing there. So it felt a little crazy to me and almost wrong to sort of get in a car and drive out to this idyllic landscape in the mountains. We had all also been in shelter in place for a while, in this unknown amount of time that this pandemic was going to go on. So, Shai, I think you can go to the next slide, please. I started driving and I got past Reno and the landscape sort of opened up and the cities and towns fell away and my body had this huge relief reaction and I just started bawling in my car. And I knew sort of that I needed the space and nature, that I was craving that, but I didn't quite realize how much. So I was so grateful to be in Wyoming and Teton County, where Jackson is. Charlotte, could you please go to that last slide? Is the county in the entire United States that has the highest income and wealth. And it's also the county in the United States that has the largest disparity between the rich and the poor. So that was swimming around in my head. And as well, there's a lot of, like many places, there's a lot of denial and sort of erasure of the native populations that have lived in this area over time. I had somebody, a local, tell me that, oh no, there were not people that lived here permanently before European settlers came in. And what that actually turned out to mean was that they didn't live there permanently because they moved with the seasons, but they were permanently there every year. So all of that was sort of, brewing. And what I realized when I started working, especially in the studio, was that all of these things were not going to just disappear by the fact that I was in a beautiful place. And so all of them were coming into the work really directly. And even though it might not be obvious on the outside, those things really are there in what I made.
Thank you all. Mountains and molehills. What challenges or hurdles did you overcome, or do you continue to face in the process of creating and or exhibiting this work?
I found the process to be rather lovely and simple. It felt familiar. And that said, I think I'm a person who's still trying to figure out how to find funding and resources as an art maker. I would really like to be able to pay dancers and designers for their work and their labor and their beautiful artistic creations and collaboration. The only person who did get paid in this process was Andrew, the sound designer, because that process happened outside of when we had both graduated. The film was made during school, but the composition of the sonic landscape happened a little bit after, and that was still just like money out of my own pocket, which I'm fine with, and still want to figure out how to get some funding to make work. And on the exhibition side, I'll say that the film was impacted by COVID, like all of us. So where it was seen and how it was seen definitely affected its exhibition life, but I am proud of its festival life, and especially with it showing with the Center of Asian American Media annual film festival last year, 2021.
Congratulations. That's awesome. All right, Meredith.
Some of the challenges that came up for me in this were just learning more about what trust the process means to me, starting to make something feeling like it doesn't mean anything and it's all dumb. And then learning about my own path to making something that I really care about. And that was especially true, like I was talking about in the last section in summer of 2020, where it was like, am I really just trying to make dance moves right now? And the world is, doing what it's doing. I also learned a lot about editing in this process. I started with iMovie and found out that it was not up to what I wanted it to do. And so I taught myself at least an introductory level of Adobe Premiere Pro in order to make what I made. I would love to get a lot better at that. And I learned about the process of getting rights to music. Ended up just direct messaging all the musicians involved in the piece of music that I used for the screen dance. And part of the challenge in that was that it was an older song that was covered and I was using the cover. So all of the people involved I wanted to check with, one of which is like very reclusive. And then, the festival submitting process, I learned a lot about, had no idea about Film Freeway before this and learned about that. And again, would like to learn more about strategy for that. And all of how to do that better.
Thank you, Meredith.
So for Switchin, the mountains and molehills really focused on the post-production process. So as I alluded to before, each person was filmed separately, and I had to create basically a sound, a beat, a song. So I had to shift through a lot of the footage and finding like particular phrases or nonverbal sayings, grunts, all that to make a beat for the entire film. But it was really fun to do that, drawing from experiences from my past to make that. I think the real mountain is the play at festivals, so it really straddles the lines between experimental and dance. And I'm grateful that it got into like Athens International Film and Video Festival. It played really well in Chicago, especially using it as a launch pad during Black History Month for NBC5. So I'm really appreciative of that, but overall it has not played at a lot of festivals, and I think it's because of the content with which is very jarring, especially the use of the N-word at the first half with primarily the African American speakers, and then the latter half with the white actors using it. So the piece is quite uncomfortable to most, as it should be, I think, to promote conversation on the barriers of language and how language is policed in our culture.
Thank you, George. Okay, so this is our last question here, so get your questions going. Are you hanging in? Are you doing all right? It's the last lecture of the day, so lecture, what? Round table. That's right. So leaps and bounds, where is this work heading and what is next for you in the realm of screen dance and artistic pursuits? And or how might universities and arts organizations better support artists such as yourself through education, production, curation, and presentation?
For me, I think my most urgent curiosity lies, you can go ahead and play it, Charlotte, in exploring more about this juxtaposition of timescales. It's intersecting with my current interest in studies in Tai Chi and Qigong.
You see this thing, George?
It's on the chat.
So I would like to
No,
just
this is this.
get into that a little bit more.
Just Zoom.
I'm Mrs. Elsie. Maybe we'll pause for a second. Mrs. Elsie, did you want to give a message to George?
It's in the truck. You're right. That's his short
Can you
film.
mute yourself, whoever is speaking at the moment? Can you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you very much. Awesome.
I got it.
There we go. Just last thing, I would like to explore some of that with more people other than myself, and so that equals money.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Meredith. All right, George.
I'm so sorry, Meredith. So switching I would love for it to be in more film festivals. I'm ignorant in sort of dance film festivals because primarily my work is narrative, and so dance films are foreign to me. That being said, I'm interested in creating more with fellow collaborators. But where I see the film heading is more of conversation pieces, particularly for communities. And I would love for it to be in academic areas as well, because language is a huge part of, it's a building block of society, and I don't feel like we've investigated enough on how we've segregated our communities with language. How do you speak the cadence, why slang is not used in certain spaces, and again, who has the right to determine what is correct or not for certain spaces.
And you're working on your thesis.
Oh yes, and I'm working on my MFA thesis, which I can talk to you afterwards.
Whaley.
Yeah, I think Chasua Chasm has lived a good life, and I'm ready to let it rest. As far as next steps go, I mentioned that I'm a resident choreographer with Mashup, and that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. It's a new work inspired by some of my grandmother's history as a Blade Runner. And I understand Blade Runners to be people who smuggled medical supplies across occupied territories during wartime. In this particular case, my grandmother was still in China, and it was during the Sino-Japanese War. So she was going into Japanese occupied territory in her homeland, trying to bring care and bring medicine to her people. Perhaps this work will manifest as a screen dance someday, but I'm really happy to be creating something for live performance in the round, which is a new experience for me. And I will say, like, in the initial stages of research for this new work, I really wanted to read something scholarly about folks who were doing this during wartime to realize that that scholarship doesn't exist, or perhaps I'm looking in the wrong places, and realizing that it's part of my job, perhaps as an artist and an art maker, to, you know, share these stories and uncover these histories as a historian and documentarian.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have time for questions. Do you have questions? And also another alternative is I have their films pulled up if you want to see a 2-minute excerpt of each one. I'm
There's
seeing
a Zoom question right now.
there is a Zoom question. So how about while we're answering the Zoom question, I can start to set up the excerpting. Yeah.
Sure.
I can read it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you,
course.
Carol.
The Zoom question is from Jiaying Gao. They say, hi, your presentation was amazing. I'm a PhD student in London, Goldsmith. My research is about to propose how to achieve dance and build a dance museum. I would love to talk to you. Can I have your email address, please? Sorry, I guess I need to read that one. But there you go.
So we can follow up.
We'll follow up, yeah. You'll follow up with them, okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just saw the question mark at the end.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, is this lighting look okay? You can see a bit?
Yeah.
Let's turn the house down.
So all of these works are short form. I really encourage you to look. I will email the links through the symposium as well. Yeah, so you have access. But for now, we'll just look at about 2 minutes of each one. Ooh, I should share my screen again. My bad. Just so that Zoom folks can see too. Okay, one moment. All right, just gonna rewind that for our Zoom audience. Here we go.
Okay, thank you, Whaley.
Should we take the question for Whaley from Zoom?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Cool.
This is from Melissa Richards. Hi, Whaley. I loved how you were able to find space that you could find freedom and acceptance in. How has that helped you set the tone for the spaces you're in charge of cultivating?
I'm happy to answer that now, or we can watch Meredith's clip. Oh, there's feedback.
Try it now. Try it. Try it now.
Hello, does that feel better for
Go
folks?
ahead, Whaley. We'll answer this question and then we'll keep watching.
Answer it now. Okay, cool. Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really lovely question. I think it really depends on what context. I was teaching at the University of Kansas last academic year, and being in a predominantly white space again, I was like, oh, how do we do equity in these spaces? And I think that's where I root from in my teaching, and in any space that I really am in and holding leadership, I try to root from a space of equity, finding what that feels like in a dance context. And how has that helped me? Being in spaces that haven't been equitable and have been equitable have all informed how I cultivate space. And yeah, rooting in radical love. Thanks.
Whaley, just to ask a little further, I mean, you do have protocols that you engage with in terms of community agreements, these kinds of things. Would you like to share that at all?
I like super cannot hear you. What?
I'm muted.
I got it. Yeah, you're muted. I'm gonna meet you there. That's what happened. There.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Maybe you can't hear me, but I'm gonna play Meredith.
Oh wait, I think you actually just muted just now. But I think I know what you're referring to. So I will say, like, I find community agreements to be really important. It's something that Charlotte and I have talked a lot about. So I think that's what she's referring to in this moment. And like how we lead spaces by creating communal agreements or community agreements, and how we want to share space with each other is not for leadership to say how we operate in, unless you're teaching in a room full of small beans, which in that case, like perhaps you got to do a little bit more leadership in those moments. But with people you want to be in community with, who have their own ideas and can share their beautiful voices in space, how we prioritize each other as human beings, and in making these agreements and how we want to interact with each other in space is something that I do really love creating at the top of any like course or process with all of the collaborators and participants.
Okay, I'm gonna play Meredith. Can you hear that? Is it working? Can they hear Meredith?
Yes.
Is that her music?
Yep, there we go.
excerpt of George's work. Oh, so many things open. George, from the beginning is okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
What? What?
What?
What?
What?
What?
Man, go home. Oh. 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 Man, go home.
Right?
I. Nigga. Nigga.
Nigga.
Nigga. My nigga. My nigga. Nigga. My nigga. Nigga. Nigga, 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 nigga. Swinging nigga.
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 Nigga. Nigga? Wait.
My nigga.
Okay. 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 Alright, cool. Okay. 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 Hey. Okay. Hey. Okay. Hey. Okay. Hey. Okay. Hey. Okay. Hey.
I see you. I see you.
Hey. Okay. Hey.
I see you. I see.
Hopefully you'll watch this on your own. Thank you, George. Any questions here in the audience? I think we have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you first. Thank you for that. I wonder. I just love the whole durag and the hair comments we did. So, can you talk a little bit more about the other symbolism you used to? Because you talked about language, but obviously there is a lot of other symbolism in there.
Sure.
Or things that are important to African American culture or Black culture, period.
Yeah, I mean, code switching is not just for language, it's for our physical being. As I mentioned earlier, as a little black boy, I'm taught to contain myself so I don't come off as aggressive or angry or threatening in certain spaces. So code switching is not just language, it's in our physicality as well, but there's also a conversation about hair. How certain hairstyles is not appropriate for the boardroom or academia. So it's, hopefully this film is a small part of the conversation on why we have these standards. And again, who creates those standards and why do we still perpetuate those things? Because I think we all know the root of it, capitalism, racism, blah, 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 but we still uphold them in the arts. Dancers can have their hair a certain way. Black men can't present themselves in a certain way or have dreads or wear cornrows or there's so many standards that we have in our society and we talk about and address, but yet we don't dismantle them, and it can't just be the group that's the minority dismantling them.
Thank you, George. Do we have time for one more, or, yeah, one more question from the audience? Yeah, Claudia, and then if there's time, Gabby. And George, you're here the whole symposium, correct?
Yeah.
So please continue your conversations with him.
Yeah, thank you, three of you, for showing your work and sharing your process. George, really interesting to see the rest of the work. And I wanted to ask, because in the UK, the BBC had a huge scandal about using the N-word in the program. And I'd love to say some more about bringing that in and playing with it. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, the N-word is so polarizing. I mean, it has a historical context to it. But the way that I'm showcasing it in Switchin is not to like say it's right or wrong, but just to show how African Americans have used that word and to regain power. We can say it, flippantly, or just saying hey or whatever, but it's still a sensitive subject because if other races use it, it automatically has a different connotation to it. So it was interesting making the short. There was a big scandal here about a country singer who said the N-word with one of his black friends. So I want this film not to just demonize white people or any other race who use it, but what is the line between appreciation from a culture and appropriation? Because there's an argument to be made that certain cultures live in these environments that black people live in as well. So do they have investment in the culture to be able to use that or have a right to use that word? Again, I'm not the word according to God with this, but I just think there needs to be more conversation around it because it's so polarizing at the moment.
Thank you. So I think I'll give my thanks now.
I'm going to say thank you. I have a slide because I don't want to forget anybody, but my computer.
You said to share your screen again, I think.
Okay.
Oh, don't leave the meeting.
I won't.
I think I can remember. I don't know if you all can hear me via Zoom. Can you all hear? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so my heartfelt thanks to Douglas Rosenberg for rising up to stand in the dark with screen dancers everywhere. To Cal Moore and the team for keeping track of the finest details. And to our panelists,